The abandoned melody, the evening light streamed through the vaulted glass ceiling of Westfield Station, casting long golden shadows across the marble floor. Olivia Bennet settled onto the worn bench of the public piano, her fingers hovering over the keys with practiced familiarity. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had made peace with disappointment but hadn't surrendered to it. She played here every Thursday evening, a tradition spanning for years. The station management had initially objected, but the station master, charmed by her playing, had eventually offered her a permanent arrangement. "You bring something this place needs," he'd told her, his weathered face crinkling with a smile. "Something that makes people remember. We're human, not just travelers passing through." Olivia smoothed her simple dress and began to play. The first notes of Debussy drifted upward, mingling with the announcements of arrivals and departures. A few travelers paused, some taking videos, others simply standing in momentary appreciation before hurrying on to their destinations. "You're getting rusty, Livy?" she whispered to herself with a small smile. Her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in her head. Music isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be felt. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had been her first teacher. The old upright piano in their farmhouse kitchen had been the center of Olivia's childhood universe. "This piano survived 2 wars and a flood," Eleanor would say. "Survive your practicing too." Olivia transitioned from Debussy to something more personal, a composition she'd written during her final year at the conservatory. Before financial reality had forced her to abandon her studies, she called it Windward, though she had never named it publicly. The melody carried hints of folk songs Eleanor had taught her, interwoven with something more contemporary. It was the piece she'd been perfecting when she met Daniel. Her hands faltered briefly at the memory. 8 years had passed since Daniel Fletcher had walked out of her life without explanation, leaving behind only a handwritten poem tucked between the pages of her music theory textbook. They'd been young, she 24, 26 Sand, completely entranced with each other and the music they created together. A small girl approached the piano, watching Olivia with undisguised fascination. Olivia smiled and nodded, continuing to play as the child's mother looked on. These small connections were why she kept returning. Her day job, as an administrative assistant at the community college, paid the bills for her modest apartment. But these evenings at the station, piano fed her soul. As the final notes of Windward faded, Olivia noticed a man in a charcoal coat turn abruptly away from the small crowd that had gathered. Something about his movement seemed familiar, the slight hunch of his shoulders, the way he tucked his chin down when in thought. But before she could get a better look, he disappeared into the stream of commuters. Olivia shook her head. Years was long enough to learn that ghosts weren't real, no matter how much you might wish them to be. She began to pack up her sheet music, nodding thanks to the scattered applause. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate, Prisha. "Don't forget milk on your way home. Also, there's a letter for you. Looks fancy." Olivia frowned. Who would? Send her a physical letter? Tucking her music into her worn leather satchel, she headed toward the station exit, unaware that her world was about to change completely. Whispers from the past, Daniel Fletcher pulled his collar higher against the evening chill as he hurried away from the station. His heart hammered against his ribs, threatening to break through. After 8 years, Olivia still played their song there, melody as if no time had passed. Her fingers had danced across the keys with the same delicate precision he remembered. Though there was a new melancholy in the interpretation that hadn't been there before, he hadn't planned to find her. Return to the city was purely practical. His father's declining health had finally forced him home after nearly a decade abroad. The family business had recovered somewhat since its catastrophic collapse.
Ow.
But Richard Fletcher would never fully rebound from the stroke that had left him partially paralyzed. Daniel had built a respectable career as a composer in Vienna, crafting scores for independent films and theater productions. He'd created a life for himself, one carefully constructed to keep the past at bay, yet here he was, drawn to Westfield Station on a Thursday evening because of a chance comment from his father's nurse. "There's a woman who plays beautifully at the station," she'd mentioned. "Reminds me of those romantic films where strangers meet by chance." Daniel had known somehow before he even arrived. His apartment felt sterile and empty when he returned. Boxes of his belongings from Vienna still lined the walls, waiting to be unpacked. He poured himself a generous measure of whiskey and sat at the small electric keyboard he'd set up by the window. His fingers found the opening notes of Windward, without conscious thought. The melody had come to them during a rainstorm. They'd been trapped in the practice rooms at the conservatory, watching lightning illuminate the campus grounds. Olivia had begun improvising, and he joined in, their musical conversation flowing as naturally as breathing. They'd stayed until dawn, recording rough snippets on his phone, laughing and composing until security had finally asked them to leave. 2 months later, his family's investment firm had collapsed under allegations of fraud. His father, innocent, but ruined, had suffered his first stroke. Daniel had withdrawn from the conservatory to help manage the crisis, intending to explain everything to Olivia when things stabilized. But then came the threats, the legal battles, the midnight move. To his uncle's home in Austria to escape the media frenzy. He'd written to her once a poem that failed to explain anything but expressed everything he felt, then forced himself to let her go. She deserved better than to be dragged into that mess, he murmured to the empty room. The familiar justification rang hollow now. His phone buzzed. A text from his father's caregiver. "He's asking for you. Having a difficult evening." Daniel sighed, setting aside the whiskey. As he reached for his coat, his eyes fell on the faded journal where he'd copied the poem he'd left for Olivia. Then tucked it into his pocket. 8 years was a long time.
Marriage.
She'd likely moved on marriage, perhaps children, certainly. A career more fulfilling than playing at a train station once a week. The woman he'd seen tonight had Olivia's face, but carried herself with a quietness that was new. Still, she played their song, before he could second-guess himself. Daniel tore out the page containing the poem and added a brief note on the back. Tomorrow, he would find a way to deliver it, not to append her life, but to offer an explanation she had always deserved. What he couldn't admit, even to himself, was the desperate hope that lingered beneath his rationalization, the hope that she might still remember, that she might still care. Notes between silences. The letter that awaited Olivia was not what she expected. It was from the Boston Conservatory, an invitation to audition for a temporary teaching position. Prisha had been submitting applications on her behalf for months, a fact Olivia discovered only after her third interview call. "You're wasting your talent filing paperwork," Prisha had declared. "Someone needs to believe in you, since you've apparently retired from the job." Olivia set the letter aside, emotions conflicted. Boston meant opportunity, but also meant leaving the station piano, leaving the last tangible connection to her past with Daniel. She was still contemplating this when she opened her music satchel the next morning and found something unexpected nestled between her sheet music, a yellowed piece of paper, folded neatly in thirds. Her hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting, the distinctive way Daniel formed his letters, slightly slanted and precise. The poem was exactly as she remembered it, though the paper had aged. But on the reverse was something new. "I heard you playing our song. I owe you the truth, finally. I'm at the Cardinal Calf most mornings. If you want to hear it, I'll be there." Olivia sank onto her bed, the paper clutched in her hand. For years she'd imagined this moment, finding Daniel, demanding answers, perhaps even forgiveness. She'd rehearsed cutting remarks and dramatic exits. But now, faced with the reality, she felt strangely calm. 8 years had softened the sharp edges of her anger. Leaving behind a quiet curiosity, she called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. The Cardinal Calf was a small establishment 4 blocks from the station. Olivia positioned herself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, ordered a cappuccino, and waited. Each time the door opened, her heart performed a complicated rhythm. By her third coffee, she'd begun to think the note was someone's cruel joke. Then, he walked in. Daniel was thinner than she remembered, his once boyish features now more defined. His dark hair was shorter, streaked with the faintest threads of silver at the temples. He hadn't seen her yet. She watched as he ordered, exchanged pleasantries with the barista, then turned to scan the cafe. Their eyes met. Time seemed to collapse between them. Olivia saw recognition, shock, and something like reverence cross his face. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with a hesitation that spoke volumes, Daniel approached her table. "You came," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. "Why to know why you left?" Olivia replied simply. No accusation, just a statement of fact. He nodded, sitting across from her. "That's fair. It's a longer story than I thought it would be when it happened." As Daniel began to speak of financial ruin, family disgrace, and a desperate attempt to protect her from the fallout, Olivia found herself studying his hands, that had once played counterpoint to her melodies, that had written the poem she'd carried in her heart for 8 years. They were the same hands, yet different, stronger, marked by experiences she hadn't shared, she realized. With a clarity that was almost painful, that the Daniel before her was essentially a stranger. They had loved each other once, created music, together, planned futures that never materialized. But the people they had become in the intervening years were unknown to each other. "The poem," she said, when he paused. I set it to music. It became windward. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability. "I heard it was beautiful. More than I deserved." Outside the cafe windows, the city continued its relentless pace. Inside, 2 people began the delicate work of discovering who they had become in the silence between notes. The unfinished symphony. For 2 weeks, Daniel and Olivia circled each other cautiously. Coffee at the Cardinal extended 2 walks along the riverfront. Conversations that stretched into early evening, exchanged stories of the intervening years, his work in Vienna, her abandoned dreams, the small triumphs and disappointments that had shaped them both. "I never stopped composing," Daniel admitted one evening as they sat on a park bench, "but nothing ever felt complete. It's like I was writing with half the instruments missing from the orchestra." Olivia understood. Her own music had taken on a solitary quality after he left, technically proficient, but lacking the spark that came from true collaboration. She'd continued playing windward, refining and expanding it over the years, but had never completed the final movement they'd once envisioned. Together, the Boston offer loomed in her thoughts. The audition was scheduled for the following month, potential new beginning, but also an ending to whatever was rekindling between them. Daniel was committed to staying in the city for his father's care. Another separation seemed cruelly inevitable.
"At play."
"With me," Daniel said suddenly one Thursday. They were standing outside Westfield Station, where Olivia was preparing for her regular performance. "Just once, before you decide about Boston." She hesitated. Their private conversations were one thing. A public declaration of their reconnection was another entirely. Yet the musician in her recognized what he was offering a chance to complete, something left unfinished, regardless of what came after. "All right," she agreed. "Next Thursday. We'll play the final movement as we imagined it." That week, they met daily at the small practice room. Olivia rented occasionally at the community center. The composition flowed between them as if the years had never intervened, Daniel building complex harmonies beneath Olivia's soaring melodies, challenging and complementing each other as they once had. "It needs something more," Olivia said on Wednesday evening, frustrated by a transition that wouldn't resolve. "Something that acknowledges the time between." Daniel nodded, hands hovering over the keys. "Not just who we were then," he suggested, "but who we are now." The breakthrough came at midnight. A new motif emerged, darker, more complex than their youthful composition, but ultimately resolving into something hopeful. They recorded it on Daniel's phone, both recognizing that they had created something significant, regardless of what tomorrow might bring. That night alone in her apartment, Olivia made her decision about Boston. It wasn't what she had expected, but it felt right, a choice made from strength rather than fear or obligation. For the first time in years, she slept without dreams of what might have been across the city. Daniel sat at his father's bedside, playing recordings of the new composition. Richard Fletcher, whose speech remained limited since his stroke, reached for his son's hand. "Beautiful," he managed. "Don't lose her again," Daniel nodded, throat tight. "I'm trying not to," he whispered, "but some things aren't ours to decide." The Next evening approached with the weight of significance. Whatever happened at the station piano would determine more than a musical resolution. It would answer whether two people, changed by time and circumstance, could find harmony once again. Harmony's restored Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth. Olivia reached the station early, fingers trembling slightly as she arranged her sheet music. The usual commuters bustled past, unaware of the significance of this particular performance. She had dressed with unusual Cara deep blue dress that Eleanor had always said brought out the music in her eyes. At precisely 6 o'clock, she began to play not windward, but batch. Structured, predictable, a foundation to steady her nerves. The minutes ticked by with no sign of Daniel. Doubt crept in. Perhaps he had reconsidered. Perhaps this ending, like their first, would remain incomplete. Then he was there, standing at the edge of the small crowd that had gathered. Their eyes met, and Olivia's hands faltered momentarily before recovering. With a slight nod, she transitioned into the opening. Notes of Windward. It was an invitation. Daniel moved forward, sliding onto the bench beside her. The piano was meant for one player, forcing them into proximity, shoulders touching. The scent of his cologne mingling with the station's industrial cleaner. For a measure, he simply listened. Then, finding his moment, his hands joined hers. On the keyboard, the crowd murmured in appreciation as the piece expanded, to musicians creating something greater than either could alone. They played through the familiar sections, their bodies remembering the choreography of shared space. When they reached the new final movement, Olivia felt a shift in the atmosphere, a collective holding of breath from the listeners who sensed somehow that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music swelled, incorporating themes of separation and return, loss and rediscovery. Daniel's left hand brushed against hers during a complex crossing, and the brief contact sent electricity through her fingers. As they approached the final resolution, Olivia glanced at him. His expression was one of complete concentration, yet there was something else of vulnerability, an offering. The final chord resonated through the station, hanging in the air for one perfect moment before dissolving into applause. Neither musician moved immediately, both caught in the space between creation and reality. "That was our ending," Daniel said quietly. "Just for her. The one we couldn't find before." Olivia nodded. "I'm going to Boston," she said, watching his expression carefully. "I accepted the audition." Pain flickered across his face, quickly masked. "I understand. You deserve this opportunity." "I'm not finished," she continued. "I've asked if the position could be structured to allow me to return here monthly. For performances?" For she hesitated for continuing what we've started. Hope dawned in his eyes, and they agreed. Apparently having a collaborative project with a Viennese composer makes me more marketable. She smiled. "I'm not choosing between music and you this time. I'm finding a way to have both." The crowd had dispersed, leaving them alone at the piano. Daniel reached for her hand, his composer's fingers entwining with hers. "I have a proposal," he said. "My father's health is improving. I've been offered a guest lecturer position at Berkeley. It's in Boston." Olivia stared at him. "You're following me to Boston?" "Not following," he corrected. "Meeting you there as equals, partners." The word hung between them, partners carrying connotations beyond the musical. "We have time," Olivia said softly, "to figure out what that means exactly." Daniel nodded. 8 years taught me patience, if nothing else." She smiled, feeling possibilities unfold before them. "Play with me again. Something new this time." And there in the station, as evening deepened outside and announcements echoed overhead, they began again, not a continuation of what was interrupted, but the first notes of something entirely new. Two people, shaped by separation and reunion, finding harmony in the spaces between what was lost and what remained to be discovered. This time, they would write the symphony together.